Welcome to North of 60. I'm Heidi Schweighofer. Today my guest is going to talk about some subjects that we have talked about many, many times in the town of Hudson, and that is issues of radon and issues of lead. My guest is Scott MacDonald. Scott was involved in the corporate world with real estate and managing real estate for a number of years. He then became interested in working with the company Inspection Tech, and now is in charge of their operations. And Scott, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much. Tell me how you got specifically interested in doing inspections.
Yeah, the inspection side of the real estate business has always been of interest to me because it's kind of the guts, it's the nuts and the bolts of the home. And
it sure
really,
is.
Outside of the rest of it, which is a lot of paperwork and the procedural stuff. But the fun thing about the inspection is that it's such an important part of what you're doing that it ultimately can be a tipping point for decision for a buyer potentially.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. We sold my father's 1953 home, and I want to tell you, between the lead, the asbestos, and the radon, my sister and I had a terrible time trying to fix everything up and get it inspected. I want to talk first about radon. Sure. I don't even know what it is.
Sure.
I don't know where it comes from, and I don't know why we need to worry about it.
So the first part of what you said is really the most important, is which I don't know anything about it, right? Education is really a premium when it comes to radon, because a lot of things safety-wise are tangible. You can touch them, you can see them, but radon isn't. Radon is odorless, it's colorless, it's a gas that emanates from the breakdown of uranium, thorium naturally in the soil, and comes up basically. You can't see it, you can't smell it, and the only way to test for it is using some machines that we'll talk about, but unless it's tested for, then there's no way to know that it's there until sometimes, if you're in a home for an extended period of time, it can be too late, and there are some serious and long-term health effects that you can face if it's not addressed and you're in your home for a long time.
Is it just naturally produced in the soil, or is it because of building? Is it everywhere in the whole world in the soil?
Yes. So as just part of the soil composition, there's going to be this breakdown, just the way that it's set up. You're going to have a breakdown of it. If you just walk outside, your levels of radon are going to be 0.4 to at a high of about 0.75 picocuries per liter, which is the way that kind of the metric they use for that. So it's everywhere, no matter where you go. Now, it gets higher in trapped areas in homes, and it can vary from street to street and from place to place, which is why you would test. And we recommend that folks test on every transaction, and if they've been in their home, if they've never had their home tested, if there's no historical data on their home, it's a really good idea to do so, especially depending on the level that you're at. The lowest level is where it tends to be the most concentrated, and then it kind of
the lowest level of the home.
Correct, which is why we test at the lowest livable level.
So our basement.
Correct. So if you have say your lowest levels, say you live in a crawl space, obviously folks aren't going to be in their crawl space, so you would test on the first floor.
Oh.
If you have an unfinished basement space that's never livable, you would normally test on the first floor. So it's really where folks are going to be spending time, because as the radon gas elevates up in first floor up to second floor, potentially up into an attic space, it essentially, the easiest way to explain it is that it dissipates. So the levels decrease as you move upward. It's most concentrated at the lowest levels, which is why we test at that level.
So if you test I know this sounds like a dumb question. If you test our basement and we have radon detected, does it automatically mean that we have it on our first and second floor? And does that make sense?
So you'll have it on the first floor, but it will be to a lesser extent. So, and then the same thing on the second floor, and then it depends on your living conditions as well. So the tighter your seal, the tighter that the home is in terms of insulation, in terms of its foundational cracks and its ability to escape, the lower those levels will be. So if you 8, 9 months out of the year when the weather's decent, if you have your windows open, that's kind of how you normally would live anyways. So when we test for the purposes of just a real estate transaction in the home inspection space, it's a 2-day test. It runs for 48 hours, and it's kind of a snapshot in time, which is why we operate in closed door conditions. So the windows and the doors have to be shut. Now, there's
Air conditioning, can you have that running?
Yeah, you're running everything normally as you would. We just want to keep those closed door conditions. Now, there's 2 types of tests. There's long and short term. Short term tests for the purpose of a real estate transaction,
Right.
which again would be 2 days. And then there's 90 days plus, which are long term. Now, those ones you set and you do those in what you consider normal everyday conditions. So if you do it over the course of summer, you can have your doors, have your windows open. You're kind of living that way, right? Because it's a long-term test.
Yeah.
On the short-term test, because time is of the essence, you essentially have 5 to 7 days to make a decision and potentially go back if you're purchasing a home, to either have a system installed or something along those lines. That's why for those we run them for 2 days. And again, we recommend every time folks call, do a home inspection with us, we always recommend a radon test is done, and we do those right on site, set them, day of the inspection, 2-day pickup, and it's all done within that period of time.
So is there an average, if I was to buy a home and they said, we detected radon, I imagine you detect radon in every single home you're in, do you not?
Correct.
But it's the limit then, it's that scary, it's not, it's the scary limit that you're then reporting to the person buying the home.
Correct.
And
that's measurable too. So that's a number, and it's really nice and it's really simple. The EPA has developed standards that say 4.0 picocuries per liter. If you're under that, they're not necessarily recommending. That's the action level, right? So if you're over 4.0, that's where they would recommend a mitigation system at that point in time. So just using the home inspection portion of it as an example, if the radon levels were to come back at, let's say, 8.0, the buyer may go back to the agent and they may say, hey, we want this installed, or we want a credit, or however that works, because we've detected high radon levels. There's a cost associated with the system, which is normally $1,000 to $1,200. So it's not an enormous investment, but it is in your long-term health, right? So that's normally how that would work. Now, if it comes back at 1.0, normally folks will just move on. Now the important thing to keep in mind here is 4.0 doesn't mean that you're safe. That's just the action level. So if it's, the only safe level of radon is 0, but that doesn't exist. So we want to get that as low as we can. So if it comes in, at 2.0, it's still somewhat elevated, and that does increase, even at 2.0, it does increase those levels. The chance of some of those potential long-term factors, which we may talk about in terms of what can actually happen over a long period of time with radon.
Well, let's talk about the health issues. What does radon do to us? So
everybody unfortunately knows somebody who's had cancer, and lung cancer specifically is a really difficult one. And if you were to say, hey, what's the most likely cause of lung cancer?
Smoking.
Overwhelmingly, people are going to say smoking. What most people don't know is the number 2 cause of lung cancer in the United States is radon poisoning.
No.
Behind smoking. It's true. It's true. So all of the other factors folks think of, I breathe this in, this causes everything. So smoking and radon, 1 and 2. Obviously, smoking is way up there as the number 1 thing, but radon exposure is number 2.
I had absolutely no idea that it was that. So you kind of wonder now when you hear about the people who never smoked and they're not living with a smoker, and they suddenly get lung cancer. You kind of wonder.
Let me tell you a quick story. So I know somebody who lived in their home for 40 years. This was actually her husband. Lived in their home for 40 years, never smoked a day in their life. He had a shop in the basement, and he spent all of his time down there. He was a tinkerer and things of that nature, and the gentleman ended up getting lung cancer and passing away. And it wasn't until the kids inherited the home and ended up with the estate that they tested for radon, and the radon levels, as I mentioned, 4.0 is the action level. It was 45. So,
Lord.
It was very high, obviously, more than 10 times that limit. So so it kind of goes back to what we started with, which is you don't know what you don't know, right?
No.
Folks don't recognize what it is. Again, you can't see it, you can't touch it, it's not tangible, but it's a threat to everybody's home. So if you haven't had your home tested, if you've lived in your home for a long time and you've never had it tested, I would highly recommend you call us, call somebody, and get it tested.
I am thinking that because we have lived in our home 27 years now. I'm sure it was tested when we bought it, but we haven't had it tested in 27 years.
Yeah.
And my husband spends a lot of time in the basement with the workshop.
Right.
Oh, how, thank you.
It can be startling to hear some of these facts.
Oh, that is startling.
And I'm
That's
sure
really
many
scary.
I'm sure many of your viewers have been in their homes for a long time as well, and
They
you know,
have.
this carries.
You don't think about
Yeah.
it unless you're buying or selling. I mean, you
Right.
just don't think about radon when you're walking around your
Sure,
home.
sure, and you know, it's one of those things too where it's not just you, but it's you know your children, it's your
Right.
grandkids that are spending that time as
Right.
well. So you know, the one important thing is that you know if you're in your home and levels are high and you've been there for 6 months, it's not going to most likely cause issues. We're talking about long-term exposure, but to your point, the kind of we were talking about over 10, 20 or more years, even
Almost
shorter
30.
than that, depending on what the levels are, can cause it. So it's not an immediate blast of radiation or something like that. It's more long-term exposure at these
Okay.
higher levels can cause it, which again for young children and middle-aged
Sure,
folks,
babies.
babies can really get to you. You got the grandchild, 2-year-old grandkid spends all their time in your basement, and they do that for 10 years as they're growing up. And
Oh
you just
my
don't
God.
know.
Now you've totally terrified me, Scott.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you so
and I'm
much.
sorry, Hudson. I'm just trying to give you the facts.
So let's say you come over, we have it, and our level is high. I know there's radon mitigation systems. Is that then what you would recommend? And we would install that system in our home?
Yes. So there's radon mitigation systems, as I mentioned before. I can tell you a little bit about what the system looks like, and then some of the steps that are looked at in terms of things that are preventative to keep those from happening, cracks and stuff in the foundation in the future. So the first part is the active radon mitigation system is, and folks have probably seen them, they just don't know what they look like. It's a long white pipe that goes off the side or off the back of your house, and it has what looks like a barrel down near the base of it. And it basically is a fan that just sucks the radon gas out from underneath the foundation up and out of the house. It clears the roof line. And again, folks have probably seen him, may have seen him in your neighborhood, and you probably just didn't know what it was, or maybe it's a vent pipe, maybe it's something, and that's exactly what it is. So that's an active radon mitigation system, which, like I said, depending on your contractor and your home size, is going to range in that $1,000, which again, it's not some crazy $10,000, $20,000 investment. It's really just the installation of a fan and some tubing up the side of the house.
Okay.
And then along with that comes sealing of cracks, sealing of foundation issues, anywhere that radon can seep in, because that's where it comes from. It's coming from the ground. And then same thing, like if you have a sub pump at home, possibly, they're going to seal that as well. They're going to, because you want to access your sub pump so you can make sure it's operating and stuff. But what they do, and again, folks may have seen this, it's actually a glass or a plastic top, so you can see down in it, make sure everything's operating, but they seal it entirely. They're sealing your foundation cracks, they're sealing the sub pump, and then they're installing this mitigation system that goes up and out of the house in order to get that out of there, because that's where it's going to come in.
I never thought about our sump pump. Yes, we have one.
Yeah, it's just, the sub pump is essentially an open pit to the ground. You have drain tile coming in, but it's an open pit, and most of the time, mitigators will seal those.
All right. Oh, good God. So who do they call? Obviously you.
Yeah.
But and your information will be on the show at the very end. But do we look in the phone book, let's say, for radon mitigation systems or radon? What would we be looking for?
Step one, if you're purchasing a house right now, you can do it during your real estate transaction. Most home inspectors, whether it's us or whoever, do it in conjunction with that. Now, if you've been in your home for a long time, all you need to do is check the phone book or go online, go on the internet, and you can search for radon testers. So that's where we come in. We can come in independently. We do not, we're not required to do a real estate transaction to do the test.
Okay.
So you can call me and I will speak to you directly, and we can set up a test in your home, and it's under $200. It's not expensive to run.
Okay.
And we can give you that number. Are you under or are you over that 4.0 threshold, right?
Okay.
So we're going to give you results. If they're low, great. Then you can move on. If they're high, then at that point in time, that's when we don't actually do the installation. We're just an independent third party. We do the testing, and then you would reach out to a radon mitigation specialist or installation company who would then install the system for you. They would come out, take a look at what makes the most sense in terms of where to install it, how to seal cracks, potentially sealing the sub pump. They would come out and then put the system in, and then they do a post installation reading. So you would get their reading based on what it was before. So you would have our reading, which let's say it's 8.0.
Yeah.
Then your mitigator is going to come in, and it's probably going to be around that 0.2 to 0.3. Basically, outdoor radon levels is where you land on a post mitigation system.
Okay.
And then every couple of years, you would have somebody come out, just make
Do
sure
a
the fans
retest.
operate. Yep.
Okay.
And then make sure the fan's operating. Make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. Do a retest, and it's not a constant. It's not a constant maintenance thing. We're monthly or anything like that. Once it's installed, you've got a couple of years, and each company that you talk to may be a little bit different on what their maintenance recommendations, but it's every couple of years.
Scott, people my age are always worried about hiring people who we don't know. If we wanted to make sure that the person who came out to do the mitigation system was a good, reliable, licensed person, could we maybe ask a real estate person in town who they would use, or we could ask the person who comes out who first does the radon test?
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Absolutely. So there's licensing requirements. So for example, just to test, we don't even do the work, but in order for my company, Inspection Tech, to test for radon levels, we have to be licensed with the state of Ohio. You can pull up all of our licenses on the state's website, and you can do the same thing for the mitigators themselves. So luckily there's not a Wild Wild West kind of piece of it where guys are just going out saying we'll install something
like
and
roofers.
giving you a lemon. Exactly right. So yeah, there's state stuff. Especially, I mean, because you're dealing with a potential health hazard situation, right? So yeah, there's licensing involvement on not just the testing, but on the mitigation side as well.
Okay.
And to your question about real estate agents, yes. Any good and experienced real estate agent has run into high radon levels during a transaction. So they normally have one or two people that they would go to. And again, time's of the essence with that. So they get them on speed dial, and they're pretty good about getting it done because you're on a time limit with that.
All right. We have a few minutes to talk about the other big problem, and I suspect a big one here in Hudson, and that's lead. I know, Hudson has a lot of historic homes. The whole downtown is historic. And so I think the year, I'm looking at my notes, is like 1978.
Yes.
So that was the big, so tell me about, let's talk about where we would find lead in our homes, why 1978 is significant, and your thoughts about people who particularly live in the historic homes here in Hudson.
Sure. So
or anywhere.
Absolutely. So 1978 is relevant because that's when the use of lead-based paint was outlawed. Before that, lead-based paint. You can find this on the internet of kind of a percentage of homes that had lead-based paint. It began to taper off after the 20s to 40s to the 60s. So it was as high as 80% in the 20s, and then it dropped down as you made it closer to the 70s. And once you got to 78, because as time passed, more work was done and research was done, and some of the effects of lead poisoning were coming to it. But unfortunately, legislation can be a little slow sometimes on things. So once we finally got there, that's why it's relevant and a big thing in Cleveland right now, if you've been watching the news as well.
Huge.
A lot of investments being made in it. Now, places that you can find it are really, it's in water, it's in paint It's in just several, I mean, really several different places. So really the big thing right now in Cleveland and kind of the Cleveland Lead Coalition has to do with the lead-based paint, flaking paint, lead particles, things that are going to be in the air that are breathable. That tends to be one of the issues, really just from a home. I mean, anyone has painted their house, obviously, inside out, and over time it starts to flake. And those little flaking particles are going to be in the air. And a lot of the historical homes in Hudson are going to have that. It's, very, very rare. I would imagine a tiny percentage of folks have no lead in their homes, especially the older ones, and they've probably been painted over several times.
So if they have, let's say that I have a historic home and I've painted my windowsills or wherever 50 times since the very first owner was there. Am I hiding the lead? Is the lead going away? Is it hidden so much under paint that I don't have to worry about it anymore?
There are some different options for what you can do. So it's almost certainly there. And just because I know we're a little bit limited on time, so there's some options for what you can do. So there's lead abatement assessments, and then there's repair, restore, painter, which is another thing. They're basically two different sides. So
right.
Lead assessment is going to come out and say there's most likely lead here, 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 and here. Covering it up is not, or painting over is not necessarily an issue. That's kind of part of that restore, that repair, that painting side of it. That's what we see, and that's a lot of what's going on in Cleveland right now. Is it's not. You're talking $30,000+ potentially on a full abatement. So if you want to do that, you can, but you have to keep in mind that over the years you're talking about repainting every 5-10 years on a 100-year-old house that's painted over several times, and a lot of that work on a full abatement, right, would be gutting the whole property, and it's just not
Lord.
It's not reasonable.
No.
Just financially for it to happen,
No.
In some of these cities. And so one of the big things right now is getting some of these certified contractors to be able to handle the flaking paint, some of the things that we're seeing, and the lead clearance that we're just, again, using Cleveland as kind of an example, kind of leading the way with this coalition on this, is lead clearance testing, which is actually what we do, is we basically go in and we're checking visually for we're checking for dust particles, we're checking windowsills, to your point, we're checking exterior, we're checking finished basements, we're checking for flaking paint and visuals, and then we actually are doing lead, we're doing segments of spaces, and we're actually doing wipe down tests, and it goes to a lab and they check for lead levels in 12 to 15 different spots within the house. Now if you pass the visual and if you pass that, the lab testing, you would get your lead safe certification, which is what the city of Cleveland and all of this big $100 million plus investment right now is all about, is that specifically. So to what you were saying, no, all of these homes, I mean 90% of homes in Cleveland and folks are living in that are rentals were built before 1978. So it's just not economically feasible to abate all of them, right?
No.
So let's take the steps to make sure that it's safe for the kids, because ultimately that's where we see the most issues.
Right.
The youngest kids have the most cognitive issues going forward.
Can adults have issues from lead?
They can. It tends to be more sickness-based, anemia, things like that. But you're talking about with kids, lead poisoning, you're talking about like cognitive issues, neurological issues that are long-term and permanent. And it's almost like we talked about with radon. So you can obviously see flaking paint, but you can't see paint particles, and there are things that are going to be hidden. So that's a big part of what Cleveland wants to do now with this is to get this visual, get this lab testing, and get these cleared. And folks are going to have to do these. These landlords are going to have to do this every 2 years, basically. And it's going to start. We're starting to see momentum for it to start to spread out to the suburbs, other suburbs that potentially that have a lot of rentals and things like that. But Cleveland it's really centralized there. But yeah, so that's kind of a rundown of what they're doing right now, and kind of the lead versus the repair and restore.
So we have very, very little time. If I live in an old home here and I have flaking windowsills, should I have an inspector come in to my home and see if we have lead-based paint? is it something I should worry about in a historic home?
You definitely can. So if you're seeing that there's flaking paint, and especially if it's working down lower levels, because everybody's seen what, the first little bit comes off, and then maybe
But
a little
then
bit
it
more
goes
comes off.
deeper and
Exactly, it goes
deeper,
deeper.
right.
The deeper you go, the more the chances that you're going to get that. So I would never turn anybody away if they wanted to have a conversation about it. So
Okay.
I would definitely reach out to a professional if you have concerns about lead paint, because the reality is that if you're in a Century home, there's a good chance that it's there.
I would think there'd be almost 100% chance that it's there.
Absolutely.
And opening the windows is not going to be the answer, is it?
Because you're still going to close it, you're still going to have air movement, forced air. Most folks have furnaces, which are forced air systems,
Right.
so you're blowing air through the house.
I always thought that the lead poisoning that I had read about, like in Cleveland, was from children ingesting lead paint or chewing on something that was, but I didn't realize that I guess I never thought about particles in the air.
It's certainly part of it, and not only that, but there's lead in water as well. So when we do
Yes,
work
the
in
flint.
Cleveland, we do
Oh my
exactly.
God.
We do inspections in Cleveland, and we get a handful a year of lead main lines into the structure, where it's actually lead based from the street down into the structure, and folks and owners, landlords sometimes aren't aware, and that's part of what we do to help identify those things.
We are out of time. Oh, Scott, this was so interesting.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate this. If you want any information about Scott and his company, or if you have questions about radon or lead in your homes, I know I certainly do now, and I am certainly planning on having him visit us and do a radon test in our basement. If you're interested in the same, all of his information will be listed at the very end of this show. So thank you for watching. Important topic. Thank you.
Heidi.
Thank you for coming.